Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank all the proponents and the supporters of this bill because I too have some stories that I'd like to share. I had the privilege of being a Board of Education chair and had the honor of serving with a black superintendent. She had grown up in East Hartford. She had grown up in a Coldwater flat. She was the oldest of 5 children. She was a very good student, and when she graduated from high school, her intent was to go to secretarial school because that's what happened to her. That was the course that she was led, and if it wasn't for her guidance counselor, her white guidance counselor, she would not have gone to the University of Connecticut with a scholarship for the first year because this guidance counselor said, if you can succeed with what you've done and what you have within you, you can get scholarships and scholarships. And by the way, when she finished her education, she not only became a teacher with a master's degree, she also became an attorney, had her own firm, and then I thank God she came to Stratford and she was our superintendent. And when I was working with her, along with the other board members, Stratford's minority enrollment is for about 40 to 50% now, 40% then. And we were looking for minority teachers because, as the previous speaker just said, how important it is to learn from those that look like you and to grow up that sense of community and that sense of what you can be and where you can go. And so one of the things, or a few of the things, that we had problems with were some barriers. And so if I could ask a few questions to the proponent of the bill, through you, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the areas, the first area that we had problems with when we were recruiting was the cost of college education in Connecticut. And I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Speaker, if that's one of the areas that you're going to target or you plan to target in the study.
Representative McCrory.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, through you, Mr. Speaker, absolutely. One of the things that my colleague, Representative Fleischman, talked about, some of the things that we have put into appropriation budgets that we've been doing the last few years is actually putting opportunities, financial opportunities, rewards, grants in place for people who want to go into the field of education, but minority teachers who want to go into the field of education. So that's something we're currently doing, and I'm sure that's something the task force will continue to do. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hoydick.
And I thank the gentleman for his answer. Another area that we faced some barriers were when we were recruiting out of state because cost of educating was less expensive in other states. And we were trying to get people to come up to Connecticut and work in our district. And they found affordable housing to be a huge issue. And so I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Speaker, if the good gentleman could address how he thinks the task force
Representative
will work with
McCrory.
this.
Well, through you, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And absolutely, you're right. What you find that many people of color who live in the state of Connecticut, they go down, they go south, they go other places to get their education. For one, it's cheaper. For two, the cost of living is cheaper, and also the weather is better. And unfortunately, what happens is when they go away from here, they don't want to come back. They find opportunities in other states. But what we have here in the state of Connecticut, we want to, probably one of the things we want to do in the task force is to find incentives to incentivize young people who want to come back in their communities. The city of Boston has done a great job of identifying that they had the same problem. What they did was work with the Boston College and develop a program where actually they have incentivized and found housing, cheaper housing for their teachers, the young people who want to come back and live in their community. You heard earlier that it's so important that we have opportunities and teachers to live in the communities in which they work so they can develop that network, that relationship, which is so important in education with their children. So again, one of the things the task force will do is look at finding ways to incentivize housing issues that our young teachers may face. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hoydick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for that answer as well, because those two particular issues were critically important to why we were not successful when we were recruiting. And just on the third note that I'd like to bring up tonight, because I know we want to move this on and vote on it, we found that the human resource directors that were doing the recruiting were not exactly knowledgeable about how to recruit and how to entice not just minority teachers, any teachers into a district. I think, when you apply in a public school setting, You don't get a response that your application has been received. You don't get a response if what the interview process is going to be like. You don't get a response to what the schedule is going to be like. So you're submitting and you're waiting. You're submitting and you're waiting. You're going on the sub list. You're coming off the sub list, and it's very, very frustrating. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the good gentleman has any ideas about how the task force might address issues of the actual hiring process through you.
Representative McCrory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You are absolutely right. One of the problems we do as our human resource people, unfortunately, in many of the urban communities, they don't know how many teachers they're going to need towards the end of the year. So you're right. You're waiting. People are waiting and waiting to see if they're going to get a job. And unfortunately, they wait too long. Those teachers get scooped up by school districts in the suburbs. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that we can do with this task force is encourage our schools of education to offer employment earlier in the process, maybe around the month of February or March, when there's a potential teacher that's coming out, and offer them the job much earlier than they normally do. So that will be another way to incentivize or encourage people to come into our school districts and want to teach. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hoydick.
I'm very encouraged with that answer, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very encouraged with Representative McCrory being so involved with this in the task force, and I thank my colleagues, and I thank my colleague from Stanford for sharing her story. And one last thought I just want to leave with you. When I was working with this wonderful superintendent, we changed our school motto for the town of Stratford, and we changed it to "Only the educated are free," and how true that is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.